with MLA Rich Coleman, MLA for Langley East. Want to acknowledge that we're in Coast Salish traditional territory, as in the spirit of reconciliation. And I also want to thank the Port of Vancouver, who are our sponsors for Coffee and Conversation and continue to do so. My name is Frank Buckholz. I'm the North Langley Community Director for the Greater Langley Chamber of Commerce. And Rich Coleman, I know Rich very well. He's been our MLA in Fort Langley, Aldergrove, and now Langley East since 1996. So that is a grand total of 24 years. Is that correct, Rich?
That's right.
Yeah. And you have recently announced that you're not planning to run again, and congratulate you for your service, first off. Do you have any idea who might be willing to take up the plate?
Well, there's a number of them actually, Frank. I'll stay here obviously to when the next election comes or close to it. So the MLA's office is still open. I'm still doing the stuff we normally do, except for I don't have to go up to 2 or 3 nights in a week to events and every weekend to event. That's the one thing that's really been different. So far, I would say there's 5 or 6 people that are interested in seeking the nomination that have talked to me. There are some others that were about to talk to me before the COVID thing, and they've now reached out. We just announced yesterday to the party members that the nomination is now open, which basically means the party will now take applications for people who want to seek the nomination in Langley East. They then put their names in and they're sent a questionnaire. They fill out the questionnaire with references and stuff, and then they can send that in, and when they become an approved candidate, they get the membership list and they get that, but they also need to go sell memberships to support them for the nomination. We expect our plan would be that we would have that nomination sometime around late October, early November.
Okay. And do you have any sense, Rich, at this stage, I know COVID has really thrown the political schedule off base like every other schedule, but do you have any sense if the minority government is likely to last until September 2021, which is the date that
there's a couple of things. To their advantage could be they have because they're a minority government, they could create a situation where they fall and they have to go to the polls early, or they can go to the polls early. There's nothing stopping them on the fixed election schedule from going early. I think I think the dynamic around will change because the Green Party is basically leaderless, and we'll have a new leader by June, I think it is. And so then you'll have the Green Party who have 2 seats because Andrew Weaver's going to sit as an independent in the legislature. I think you'll have that dynamic coming into it. I think we'll get more of a sense of it if we sit this summer. So one of the rumors of conversations between House leaders and other people around in and around the legislature is that we might go back the 15th of June, partially with some people in Victoria and a lot of people on Zoom during certain estimates by this type of format, especially the estimates debates on the budget. And then legislation, there would be some people present in the legislature, but reality is when estimates are going, debates are going on in legislatures, usually it's whatever shift is on. So they talk about 30 people could be in there, but actually during a normal session, the quorum is about 11 or 12, and that's what you would have in there because they're usually in committee meetings and doing other things anyway, and they come when the bells ring when there's a vote. So that's one of the rumors, June 15th through to probably the end of July, or so that could be a 6-week session and then coming back in the fall, or they may decide just to do a fall session. Depends whether they have legislation ready or not. But that dynamic will play out in the next 60 days because I think everybody's been pretty nice during the COVID period, but the COVID period with reopening, we're starting to see a lot more angst from people and criticism, and they're saying, why aren't you asking this question about my business or that? Because in that first 4-week period, particularly where we asked people to social distance and stay home, none of us, right from the very beginning, said we're going to cooperate 100% on this thing to make sure we get past it. Now we're moving into a different dynamic. I think you'll see the stories coming out that will then be questioning some things the government may or may not do.
Right. Okay. Well, actually, that leads into one of the questions, and you mentioned, I haven't seen it on my screen, but you mentioned that Living Waters Church is here. And one of the questions that I've been given.
Well, I have this, it says Living Waters Church, doesn't say the guy's name.
Okay.
He's there.
Okay. One of the questions.
You might want to unmute and tell us who you are.
Yeah. Please,
There you go. I can't hear you. You're unmuted, but you're not coming through.
Okay. There we are. Can you speak? Okay, not without
You
earphones.
can't hear. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
He can hear us. Okay. So I guess you're asking the question, Frank.
I'll ask the question.
You can call me if you want. Write down my cell number. You got a pen.
No. Do you want to give?
I'm going to give him my phone number,
Yeah, do that.
778-808-0045.
Great, thank you. So one of the questions that I've been given to pass on to you, and I know this is of concern to churches all over, is has there been any directive from the government and the public health officer as to when churches will be able to resume actually meeting in person?
This has been a real frustration, particularly in this riding and within my own church community too. They're still hanging on to the 50-person gatherings. And I have pushed back, and I have sent in questions to health and asked for recommendations on this. And I'll use my, let's say, my church as an example. So I go to St. Nicholas, which is a church up in Walnut Grove. It has a church. You could probably put social distance, let's say 60 people in there to be flexible to go to church, but you could also put another 60 or 70 people in the gymnasium area because that's attached to the building. There's also a cafeteria eating area. They could probably put another 25. They're trying to get an answer because they could do it from video then, you know, and can they do that? And at this point, they're not getting answers. The church in Chilliwack says they're just going to open up because they feel they need to. I'm hoping we see some clarity on it in the next reports coming by Bonnie Henry today or tomorrow, because those questions have been submitted. Because we have a huge, as you know, we have a huge faith community of all kinds in Langley, and particularly in my riding and in Langley, the rest of Langley, and the Fraser Valley, quite frankly. And, you know, it's fine, and I do it. I go to my church service online on Sundays, but it's not the same. The spirituality is different, and people are feeling that they want to be connected, not just to their church community, but particularly to the inspiration of a gathering where people actually feel the presence of God, whichever faith community they're in. And I think it's become a bit of a challenge because people are really missing that, and they think it's really important to them, both health-wise and spiritually. So been pushing to have better clarification and start to understand how we could allow that to open up more, because I think it's important. And given the fact there's 2 cases today and they're not in the public, they're actually in care homes, so we're not running around. And I was talking to colleagues this morning that have none in their communities, in their hospitals even. It is a point where we got to say, when do we let people be people again? And you know, people will be respectful, I think, of the distance and what have you, and they could still be allowed to worship. So
yeah, well, thank you very much for that clarification, Rich. Sort of along that same line, is the small business community has been hit very hard by restrictions. Some of them have not even been laid down by the public health officer. Some they've just chosen to close. But now we're into phase 2. There is some reopening taking place, and I think as you mentioned, you as MLAs are starting to hear more pressure from people as to how that affects them specifically. Is there more that the province can do to assist the small business community?
Well, I think you got to be careful, because what happens whenever a government does a program, it tends to pick winners and losers. It tends to not understand every business and how it's impacted by something like this. So you can have a business that's actually been operating at 30% down from its normal revenues during this period of time because there's customers that are still coming in. There's businesses like the travel industry and the hospitality, particularly in the tourism industry, that have been devastated. because their bookings that they would have had even for, let's say houseboats on the Shuswap or whatever, they may lose their season, and it might be tough to stay in business. And so I think they have to be mindful of that when you decide you're going to put certain things in place. People forget that in BC how important rubberized tourism is, campgrounds, beaches, people go to them, that's a destination for them and their families, an affordable vacation. And we've been encouraging them to get more clarity on that. And some campgrounds have just opened up and said, look, we're far enough away of social distancing, we're not breaking any rules. The hospitality side on the restaurants and bars, I've been watching it closely because I know a lot of people in that business, and I've heard from a lot of them. A couple that were going to open yesterday are actually opening today because it just hadn't quite got there with the health officers for their approvals. They've done a lot of work to basically separate and be able to find a way to separate. And in some of the larger facilities where, let's say, they got a big deck and they got inside space and they got some other outside space, and they've been allowed in some communities to even go out on the sidewalk to expand their patio space. It doesn't mean that they're going to come back full bore, because it's going to be probably 50% of their capacity if they're lucky. Maybe if they get some expansion, they might get up to 60%. But these guys have huge overheads. I mean, you take a lease, I know of one business where the lease is $20,000 a month. So their landlord's been good to them, saying, I'll take 10 and the triple net. Understanding, I'll do that for a year, I'll defer it, change it, because I want to keep you. And so that particular business is opening up today, and you have to appreciate what happened to them. So I have a friend that's in the pub and restaurant business. So as an example, on the Easter weekend last year, his gross sales were $90,000. This year they were under 10. So you've got people who are laid off. Even with the wage enhancement to get people back to work, you got to have the work for them, and you have to have the revenue to go with it, because you're still, even at that stage, paying 25% of the wages, and that's only for businesses that are below a certain amount. So it's been really interesting, Frank, because I've had everything from a tenant that has been with a landlord for 30 years. The landlord says, I can't get the enhancement federally because my building is paid for, so I'm going to hold you to it. If you don't pay in 2 months, I'm sending in the bailiff. And I actually had a conversation with that landlord, and I said, you realize that there's going to be a whole bunch of people lined up for commercial space when this is over. Maybe long-term for your business, you might want to think of treating this tenant better. And so all of these dynamics are there. And I think they need to get to open, which they've done on the hospitality side. I think a lot of people themselves, if you look even on the traffic on the long weekend, have made the decision it's time to open, because they're past the fear, they've seen the numbers, they want to get back to business. And there's some business, quite frankly, that won't ever open. Yeah. Because it's been too big of a hit.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Then another thing that I think you just alluded to it a little bit with people's activities this past weekend, and there's no question that there was certainly more activity. I understood the ferries were fairly busy, and certainly parks and other places saw more activity. How best can government communicate with the public when it comes to opening other facilities that aren't yet open? I'm thinking of things specifically like ice rinks, the event center in Langley, movie theaters, some of these places. How can they get the message out, and so that people understand what they should or should not be doing if they're going there? And also, how can you have a clear message when you have different health regions? Because as I understand, different health regions are taking some different approaches to certain things like gyms and fitness centers.
Yeah, there has been some interpretation allowed for different areas of BC, and probably, if we're honest with ourselves, like the Fraser Health region where I'm at had the most cases and the most deaths of COVID. Vancouver Coastal was the next one up. And you have areas of BC where it's been very, very minimal. In some cases, there's hospitals in the interior of BC that have no cases in their hospitals today. And so I think you've got to be somewhat flexible. And I don't know the answer to how we get back to spectator type events, but eventually we will. It'll either be because we decide we want to take the chance and allow people to go and operate properly. I think there's some examples out there that could have been learned early on by municipalities. My municipality, for instance, closed all the dog parks and locked them off and locked off, the playgrounds in the parks. I got that piece. But fortunately, we live where there's Metro Vancouver, and I've had criticism of Metro Vancouver over the years, but I don't have on this one. They left the dog parks open, like at Derby Reach and Campbell Valley and out in Aldergrove. And of course, we go there, and they're beautiful places, lots of acreage for the dogs. But even on the long weekend, the field at Derby Reach, people were distanced. Even when they're in the dog parks, they were distanced. They finally opened up dog parks. We got up behind me in Willoughby, we've got well over 1,000 condos. One condo building of 165 units has 90 dogs in it.
Yeah.
Where are they going to go? So I did go back to municipality and said, can't you take a look at this and maybe just get a little discipline around it? Because people seem to be listening to the 6-foot thing. And I've been there, and it's not a big deal. But I'm concerned about, like, part of our society is the ability to congregate and enjoy each other's company and enjoy sports. And I'm a sports fan, so I look forward to when we can open up sports again, and I hope it's soon. I think as we come through the next 60 days and see how our numbers are and how the weather's affecting, maybe we can loosen some of that up. But you take this, I'm in the event center. This is where my office is, and I'm in my office. And, in this building, you could easily accommodate a turnover of minor hockey teams from both sides of this building without them actually touching up to each other until they got onto the ice. And then the question is, if an age bracket of young kids don't actually, get sick from this and they're not transmitting at a level we thought they were before, should they be able to go play hockey? I can tell you what's happening when we closed all the tennis courts and basketball courts in the municipality. The kids played basketball in the cul-de-sacs, right? They ride their bikes in the cul-de-sacs. It's tough for them to social distance when they're shooting a basketball back and forth, but they're doing it. They've been doing it because you can't lock a kid down 24/7 and expect that it's healthy for them. So I think it's a big step next, but I think if some of the sports organizations do some of the stuff like they did with NASCAR on Sunday, where they had a race in the US and with no fans, at least get on TV and start bringing back some of that. I think it's important. It's a shame to sit here and see this building that has usually hockey and skating and figure skating going on it all the time. And when it's not being used for that, it's being used for basketball and other things and people walking the track upstairs inside. And you need to get these facilities open if you can, and you got to listen to the health officer. But my hope would be that they'll come up with some plans for that. Right now, they're sticking to the only 50-person gathering piece. So, the question is, could you drop your kid off to play hockey and not have 50 parents in the stands? The place holds over 5,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
So they could probably social distance in this building, right? So it's, I think there's going to have to be some common sense on that one eventually.
Now, one thing that the Chamber has certainly been quite interested in, and we've talked to you about this before in other meetings we've had, is to see SkyTrain extended to Langley. And one of the things that we've been hearing is that something that the federal government would like to do to really encourage employment is to get shovel-ready projects approved quickly under infrastructure funding.
Yep.
What do you see happening with that particular project? Is that a likely candidate for that?
I don't see why it wouldn't. I mean, there's some highway projects and that sort of stuff in BC that are actually tendered and ready or already designed that you can move on, including SkyTrain. If you recall back when we had the 2008-2009 crisis, when we were government, we chose to accelerate our capital spending on infrastructure. And the reason we did that was twofold. One, it's an impetus to the economy and jobs, but you also get better prices. So you get better prices on the infrastructure because there's more competitive edge because people aren't all busy. And so you're getting more competitive bidding. And I think this would be a time to take the opportunity to invest in infrastructure. Because I think there's a lot of money going out the door could be used for something like that that's not necessarily wise. I mean, there's a lot of money being spent by governments that actually, quite frankly, I think we'll look in hindsight and say we put some debt on our shoulders, but we didn't get anything returned on what we did. And we may have overstepped on our spending. And I think governments around the world, I think, are doing it, but they're starting to come to the realization they're really affecting their debt to GDP, and this will have a long-term effect on their economy if they don't wake up and figure out how to reel this in.
Okay. And what stage is that particular project at, Rich? I know that there had been quite a bit of work done when the plan was still to have it as an LRT system. Is the SkyTrain plan developed well enough by TransLink that it could be approved fairly quickly?
I think people know the route. I think to Fleetwood is probably more advanced than it is from Fleetwood to Langley. But that's the whole idea of accelerating infrastructure. You know, you decide you want to move on and get at it, you know.
Yeah. I have a question just related to this. Has come from Cheryl, one of our participants, saying, what is the possibility, as we're talking about infrastructure funding, to consider reactivating the interurban line, which the province still has the right for passenger transportation between Westminster and Chilliwack?
I think it's still a bit of a pipe dream. I mean, that thing's been analyzed and studied, and when I saw the studies and the cost benefit analysis a few years ago, it really wasn't easy to justify it at the level of infrastructure you had. And there's all kinds of issues with regards to the access to the rail itself and when you can do it. I mean, I remember when they did the West Coast Express, how much difficult it was with the rail lines. Of course, now the rail lines are even busier. I haven't had that one come across my desk, even as a conversation, probably in a few years. So I haven't seen anything that would say that that thing is going to be advanced.
All righty, I've got another question for you here. The provincial and municipalities, you did address this a bit, but you might want to expand on it a bit more. What more can they do to not only assist businesses, but just to sort of, I think, maybe even spread the word that businesses are opening, that the economy is starting to function, that it's important to get out and support local businesses? That helps employment, that helps people's confidence. Is there more that can be done than is being done right now? I mean, the province has been doing quite a bit because, of course, of the daily news conferences.
Yeah, but the news conferences are basically health news conferences. Like Dr. Bonnie Henry and Adrian Dix do their thing, and they give us an update on what have you. There's been the odd one where the premier's come out and talked about, the legislature talked about things opening up. It's tough, Frank. I mean, when the pubs were going to be, you know, getting to open up, I did a boosted post on my Facebook. Cost, I don't know, $40 a day for 3 days, and its penetration was 14,500 hits, right? I think using social media, not just as the basic social media that you would do on your Facebook or on your personal page is different because that's usually your friends, but the public page, using those mediums like Google and those to get the message out is important. And I think, you know, frankly, I think some of the community newspaper stuff, I still find that valuable because it goes to every doorstep and gets people's information. There's not the flyers there used to be and never that sort of thing in it, but it still comes and it gives you the local information. And putting eyes on something in paper, that's the best place to do it, because the major papers would be a waste of your advertising money because they don't have the penetration here. They die off because they come across the Port Mann Bridge, the readership drops. But it's also, how do you penetrate markets? And I think my experience is you can drive it a little bit by spending some money online to actually get the message out that you want to get out. So they could do that. I think they really don't have a role above that to say it's open. I think anybody that's watching news particularly will know that the economy is starting to open up, restaurants and bars are opening up today and that sort of thing. So it's more like, how do you encourage people to go out? Because I think there's still going to be a resistance to going out because they've been used to this whole social distancing and can I do it safely? So we have to make sure they're well educated and motivated to do stuff.
Yeah, like for example, the province is still running advertising saying, you know, social distancing, be safe, do these things, which obviously makes sense. But I think your point is well taken that there could be also an advertising campaign, perhaps on social media or elsewhere or multimedia, to say these businesses are reopening. And, you know, it's important to our overall economy and to people's employment that we patronize them when we're able
But
to.
there's 120 to 170,000 people who work full-time or part-time in the food and restaurant and pub business in BC. And those people want to go back to work, and they can if the businesses see patrons coming in. And to the credit of BC, I think a lot of people made the effort to actually support restaurants that could do takeout during this period of time. Revenues aren't enough to any more than maybe keep a few people working because of the infrastructure they got to pay for their leases and everything. I think people get it. And it'll be interesting because I think tonight's going to be the first night in some of these facilities that I know of. And it'll be interesting to see how they do. But I think people will gradually come back because it's part of in the social fabric. And, you know, Langley particularly, which will be interesting to watch because as you know, it's virtually has been for a long time hard to get into most restaurants in our community on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night. I mean, really, and that's when they have full capacity. You have to decide that you're willing to wait an hour plus because they don't take reservations. They got so many customers. So.
Yes, it will be very interesting to watch, and we certainly are wishing businesses, and particularly those in the restaurant and hospitality industry, all the best as they do reopen. And please do patronize them. And the takeout is great, but it'll be nice to be able to actually go into the facility. And as Rich, as you point out, I mean, those people will not get their jobs back unless there's enough business.
But then if one thing the government has done temporarily is given the wholesale price instead of a 20% markup when they buy their liquor from liquor stores for their restaurants. So that 20% reduction in their costs will be a big impetus to help them build the cash flow to survive, I think.
Yeah, no, exactly. So we'd like to ask you another sort of more general question. You are retiring as MLA after many years of service. What's been your favorite part and favorite aspect of doing this job?
Oh, it's always been the community. It's I've had some terrific job, right? I mean, I've had the opportunity to negotiate the softwood lumber deal, change how policing is communicated in BC with putting in prime. We're still the only jurisdiction, by the way, in North America where every police car in BC is actually on the same real-time information system, which is huge. You know, softwood lumber, LNG, energy and mines. I've been in every dam in BC, most mills in BC. It's an opportunity, but the real dynamic has still been the people locally and what you can do through a constituency office to help them and get to know folks and working with groups like the Chamber and others. That's where I think it's most rewarding, and people should always remember, like the old adage was, I forget who it was, I think it might be Tip O'Neill used to say all politics is local, and it really is as far as you were elected by the people locally, so be there for them first.
Yeah. No, and we at the Chamber certainly appreciate your being very accessible to us over the years. If we have a question, you get us an answer, and we appreciate that a lot.
We try, we don't always get the answer, and sometimes it's not an answer you necessarily like, but you get the answer.
We don't always happy with the answer, but at least you get the answer.
That's right.
And what have you found about the job of MLA that's maybe challenging and difficult, maybe the least favorite part for you?
Well, you know, I've had 24 years, so I've seen a dramatic change. I started out, as you know, 96, so I didn't have an iPhone. I had a cell phone and a pager. We didn't have we had email coming, but we didn't have social media. I think if there's the biggest change, and unfortunately it's one of the toughest things for people who want to enter public life today, is there's always criticism, and you could always have a discussion with people who disagreed with you on an issue or something like that. But today, people going into this business, and I've had it with some of our newer, younger members when they came in, I've had to sit down and work with them, who take their social media feeds to heart. And they need not to read it and not to take it to heart, because there's the bully pulpit of social media that exists. There are a group of people who are on there all the time and will attack people in public life, no matter what party they're in. And the challenge with that is you've got to set that aside and not take it personally, because it really is become a bully pulpit, and people hiding behind a handle who can say just about anything that your paper, when you were running, for instance, we were running the Langley Times, would never have printed, because it would be libelous or slander, and that has gotten to be pretty darn stupid, actually. And I think when I sit down with people who are going into it, their biggest hesitation is like, will my children read the social media on me? How my spouse will handle it, depending on your age, what they're going to say about me, and can I handle it, right? And I think that's one of the things it's a negative for entry for new people coming into politics, because they get this personal attack thing going, and they have no reason why somebody's personally attacking them. It's only because they happen to be public life. Because I could go on, I could post, for instance, on Twitter, and I could probably tell you the first 10 people that would respond to attack the post, no matter what it was, right? Just, that's the way it is. And that's changed a ton for people in public life.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we see now in election campaigns, for example, is the parties are doing research on all the candidates of the other parties and seeing what negative posts they can dig up sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah. And I hate, and that's kind of sad, because there's nobody perfect, and there's people that could enter public life would actually be good at what they did, and because they had something that happened in their life 30 years ago or 20 years ago, you're going to hold it over them, and they've already gone past it, and they've moved on, and yet you dig up these things and try and derail them, and you do the opposition research and drop it if possible during the middle of the writ, because then they can't replace the candidate and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just gotten that stuff's gotten ridiculous. I think most people are getting tired of it.
Yeah, but I mean, it seems to me anyway that political parties are going to keep doing that because it works, because they usually manage to eliminate a candidate during every.
Well, the other thing is, as you know, Frank, because you were in the business for so long, negative advertising does work. Negative advertising gets more eyes on it than positive advertising.
Yeah.
I've always tried to stay above it,
Okay. Well, thank you for your thoughts on that. I think you see that from a perspective that I think a lot of people don't, simply because of the length of time that you've been there. And I know for myself, being in the news media business for years, back when you were elected, social media didn't exist, and we were barely getting emails. I mean, we were still getting most of our communications by mail and by fax.
Yep.
Does people even remember what a fax machine is anymore?
No, they don't, actually. I had a group of young students, a group of them that I did a round table with here a while back, and I was explaining politics, and they would have been around grade 10. And I said I started out with pager and cell phone, and this is how I operated, and this is how to change social media. So after the end, we go to the question and answer. One of the first questions was, Mr. Coleman, what's a pager? Of course you don't know, because it left us, right?
Yeah. It's just amazing how things have changed, and yet the basic work of politics, as you've said, is basically connecting with people. I mean, that's the fundamental job. You're representing the citizens of Langley in the provincial legislature, and in order to do that properly, you have to connect with them.
You do, and I still believe in what I call kitchen table politics, where if somebody has an issue in their area, I go to their home and sit down and see what it is, and have a coffee with them and try and work it through with them, versus having them necessarily come to an office, because you have to have an understanding of a lot of things sometimes.
Another question I'd like to ask you, just again looking back a little bit at your years as the MLA for Port Langley, Aldergrove, Langley in general. What are some of the things that you worked on for this community that you look back on and say, gee, I'm glad I had the opportunity to be part of that.
Oh, you know, it's amazing when you think about it. I mean, the building I'm sitting in, the grant that actually was the impetus to do this, I got, $50 million unconditional grant, and then helped the other parties come together to do the Langley Event Center. I think the number one improvements, 200th Street, people forget that back when we were there, it used to be 2 lanes and it was hopeless bottleneck every day just to get across the freeway. And that, the overpasses over the railways, the infrastructure, schools, everything from Betty Gilbert's school that we built, when I was in opposition, and I worked on to get done through to the new high school. It just got finished in Willoughby, or sorry, up in Willoughby, but also the fixing up of the LSS. It's a long list, and it's those things plus little things. It's like there's a water course up above Glen Valley that people were concerned that was going to go by the way of farmland or whatever, and it was a very important piece for the headwaters of the Salmon River. Well, we quietly managed to get that put into a conservatory, and people paid in to do that. Those type of things, a lot of things you don't see. And you support groups to try and get done their things. Hospice, there's been 2 or 3 expansions to the emergency room of the hospital. All of these things take place over your term, and you work on them all. And so I think that from an infrastructure, you can see the infrastructure and touch it and feel it. At the same time, I think the youth hub are things which most people don't know about down off of 203, that is a youth hub for kids who are having difficulties, and a hub for them who might be at risk of homelessness or homelessness. Things like the Gateway of Hope on the bypass for shelter and supportive housing. A lot of those things, I mean, there's so many, and you just do, and you just try and work with community groups and try and get things done that they think is for the benefit of the community. And you do that, quite frankly, and I've had it pretty lucky, to be honest with you, Frank. I've had good colleagues as MLAs in this community, but I've also had, for the most part, over the 24 years, good councils and mayors and relationships with them and the members of parliament so that we can all work together. We're not at loggerheads here when it comes to trying to do things for the community, and that really does help when you can all work together.
Yeah, well, you certainly got a good long list there, and I remember many of those firsthand. One thing that I certainly remember that I thought you really did a good job on, and you happened to be the Minister of Housing for many years, and this certainly helped, was the community really came together to make sure that Gateway of Hope happened. Gary Johnson.
Yeah, you're very right. I was at that point pretty new in the Minister of Housing thing, and everybody was opposing every shelter, every meal, everything across BC. And Langley recognized they had an issue. Langley City at the time, we had a visionary enough mayor, and in Peter Fassbender to say, I think I can find you a site. And these things always had their big public hearings where everybody shows up and are opposed to them. But here it became the reverse. And it was really to the credit of the Rotary Club, not to anything I did or anybody else. They saw it, well, why don't we, instead of being opposed to this thing, why don't we go raise money for it? Because we think it's important. And that, I was able to use that example, how the community came together and raised money to help build the thing along with government and the Salvation Army all over BC, because it was an example I could use of how a community could approach it right. And so it was a real gift for me as a housing minister to be able to go in other communities and use that example.
Yeah, and I think that approach has continued even in Langley, even with the more recent one. We've got the housing adjacent to Home Depot, and there certainly was concerns, as you read. There always are concerns, but I think. Yeah,
I met with all those community groups face to face as we came through that, but I think they struck the balance that was needed there.
Yeah. And okay, well, boy, we worked our way through the whole list of questions here. I don't know.
Well, you had one about from somebody offline on the gaming piece, and I'm happy to answer it.
Oh yeah, yes. Pardon me. The way I got my note from Colleen, I didn't fully understand how that. But yeah, that was basically the question about how are you going to participate and take part in the not Royal Commission, but the Commission on
It's a public inquiry.
Yeah, public inquiry.
Yeah. So one of the, I think the question was, are you going to release documents? People should know we already did that. Okay, we haven't held having confidentiality on this one. Although the NDP like to say we haven't done anything, in actual fact, the Commission of Inquiry has got access to all cabinet documents. Mike DeYoung is the holder of those documents, and they have access to everything. So there's nothing that's being held back. I actually welcome it because I like the true story to actually come out rather than the narrative. People don't realize that when they did the Gaming Control Act in the early 2000s, it was after we'd lost two premiers in the 90s, one over bingo and one over casinos on the gaming file. And so the legislation was always structured that the minister was not the statutory decision maker, that the people that worked in the gaming policy enforcement are statutory decision makers. So never actually directed a policy, could only have conversation about it, couldn't ever be involved in a license, what have you, because that was to make sure politicians weren't making those decisions. The accusation is that we did, but couldn't, and we never did. The other piece was on the decisions on policing and investigation teams, never made by the minister. Anything that was ever done was by the recommendation of the board of police officers, the boards, because the reality is, we actually, like we did with liquor back in the 80s, we moved any statutory decision making away from a minister to be able to do it. And so you never actually got involved and interfered in an investigation of any kind, because that wasn't your job. You're not allowed to do it. And we did it in the 60s, statutory decision making in forestry, because of an incident that took place there. So I'm actually looking forward to it, because I think people are going to be surprised to find out how many actual investigations were going on if the police are prepared to advise them, because I know that there were significant investigations following money and significant processes. But people have to understand, if a major investigation is going on and somebody makes an accusation media-wide, and the police know that if they let out any information, they could put an informant or somebody undercover or their family's lives at risk, because these were pretty integrated and serious investigations. People say, why aren't they telling us what they were doing? Well, simply because a couple of these investigations were so complicated that that involved a massive integration across the criminal investigation system. And no, you can't have that information, because some of this could be ongoing, and nobody ever talks about an ongoing police investigation because you don't want to put it at risk.
Do you have any sense when the commission is going to get back to work, Rich? I assume things have been again.
Yeah, I think they were doing some stuff. Their plan was to start having basically discovery of different witnesses and information by fall. I think they were doing. I'm not sure whether COVID is, like, they were doing a bunch of work, research and what have you going into the spring. It may be pushed back a bit, but you know, they have a good chair who I think knows how to run an inquiry well, and I think it'll flow through properly. But I don't know. I haven't talked to anybody about whether COVID has slowed them down. I suspect, like everybody else, it's slowed stuff down.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to?
There's every document has been made available. So the accusation that we would hold anything back is wrong.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to say to us as we're on chat, Rich?
Well, keep your chin up. I know that you had a Zoom meeting last night. The chamber, unfortunately, couldn't be on it, but I mean, the chamber has a very important role to play. I do think your members who have running into issues that they need help with, or have recommendations to government how they could do things differently for business, should feed in to me and the chamber members, because we can really try and trace through. And once in a while, you get a number of people have a certain type of issue and nobody's thought about it, and then you can bring it forward and say, you haven't thought of this, what about this? Can we look at something? So I'm happy the chamber gives up my r.coleman@ledge.bc.ca email. That's my private government email, comes directly to my phone. And if there's issues that they have or things they want to ask questions about, we're happy to help.
Well, we appreciate that very much, and certainly appreciate the help you've given to the chamber over the years, and to our business members and to the community at large. Thank you
Yeah.
very much for your service. Thank you for taking the time this
I'm
morning.
sure we'll get a chance to do this again before the next election,
Yep.
so.
And I just
Okay.
want to mention two things. Thanks
Yeah.
again to the sponsor, the Port of Vancouver. And these video Zoom meetings that we've been having that you referred to, including our meeting last night, our dinner meeting, virtual dinner meeting at first. They are available on the Chamber website, and most of them, I believe, are also on YouTube. So plenty of opportunity. If any of you who are on here want to refer something that Rich has said to people you know, it's easy to get back and do that. Thanks again to everybody, Bart, and thank you so much.
Take care. Have a good day.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye-bye.